welcome to the mill. We are back. My name is Freya. I'm a clinical psychologist, and this is
Dawn, and I am a hairdresser, a mum of 3, and a business owner.
And today we are going to be talking about all things neurodivergent and sensory experiences.
Yes, this is actually really interests me, Freya. Really interests me. So obviously we all have a brain, and we're all individuals, and obviously we all process things differently. But neurodivergent people, we process even more differently, don't we?
Definitely, yeah, Dawn. There's lots of different things. So for a long time, it was maybe thought that sensory processing differences was just for autistic individuals.
Oh,
But
okay.
actually, now we know, the more research that we've looked into the whole spectrum of neurodivergence, we know that those with ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, those with dual diagnosis, lots of people can experience differences in their sensory processing. That might be that they might find some things overwhelming, or it might be some things that they find underwhelming. And we're going to explore all of those things today.
That's very exciting. So we know there's 8 senses.
We do.
Know there's the 5 that, and then there's 3 that I don't really know much about. And thank God you're here. So talk us through the 8 to start with.
Yeah, so if we think about the typical 5 that most people know are 5 senses. So we've got our hearing, we've got our smell, we've got our taste, we've got our sight, and we've got our touch. And most people are really kind of aware of those things. And we're going to explore those and how, neurodivergent people might have those impacted in a moment. But then we're also going to talk about those other 3 that you mentioned, Dawn. So we've got proprioception, which is about how we're aware of our body in space and time. Our vestibular sense, which is about our balance, and our interoception, which is like our internal sense. And again, as I said, we'll explore that a little bit more later on today.
That's very exciting because I don't even know what those big words mean. So, yes. So, which one would you like to tackle first? Which sense should we tackle first?
Well, I think one of the ones that's got a sort of the biggest reputation, if we think about neurodivergence, is taste. So a lot of people are really aware that neurodivergent people might be particularly fussy eaters. So for me, for example, when I was younger, I was a particularly fussy eater. I would peel everything. I would peel, the usual, but I would also peel grapes, peas. I even peeled skinless sausages, which was quite an achievement as a child.
Yeah, well done. I've got a child like that, actually. Funny you should say, Freya. She peels everything as well.
Yeah. So that sometimes it's about taste, sometimes it's about the texture in your mouth.
Yeah.
So sometimes, again, that's why a lot of autistic people or neurodivergent people prefer things like chicken nuggets, because they're standardized. You know what you're going to be getting. There's no surprises. You know that it's going to be consistent every time. So taste can be a really important one for neurodivergent people. But not only do we see sometimes that aversion to certain tastes, to strong tastes, you can also see sensory seeking. So you might have people who really love chili, really love spicy foods or really strong blue cheeses. So you can have both that kind of effect of sometimes some things are too much for me and I want everything to be very bland, very quiet, and other times where I really want that kind of explosive taste buds. So again, taste can be a really important one.
So I've heard for like years now, and I know people who do only eat beige food. You hear of that a lot, don't you, in the world of autism and neurodivergence? Why do you think that is? Is it just safe, like you say? Is it bland? Is it all that their senses can cope with at that time?
Yeah, definitely. So again, if you think about, if I imagine to you bolognese, so if I think about, cooking bolognese, your bolognese would probably taste really very different to mine. It might look different. You might chop your onions in one way. I might chop mine in another way. How we present it. So it could be really, really different. However, if you cook some chicken nuggets and I cook some chicken nuggets, they're both bird's eye nuggets. They're going to taste exactly the same. So what you're getting. There's something really predictable about that. Also, those foods are like hyper palatable. So they've usually got the kind of the right mix of salt, sugar. They're often finger foods as well. So again, a lot of neurodivergent people prefer eating with their fingers because it's actually much easier. They can kind of do more of that grazing as well, which sometimes those beige foods are kind of more set up for. So there's lots of reasons why those things might be preferable. And sometimes people can get really caught up in worrying, oh, my daughter's only eating this, only eating that. And obviously we want people to have a nutrient-rich diet, but if they're eating those things, then great, let's encourage them to eat those things at meal times. And then outside of meal times is when I'd be saying, oh, when, maybe let's try a little bit of strawberry, or let's try a little bit of, broccoli or something. So you take some of that pressure off. So if we're thinking about it from that sensory perspective, you don't want to be overloaded at a meal time. That needs to be a safe time. And then other times can be those times for, exploring.
Yeah. I find as well, in my house anyway, in my household, in my family, some of my children like wet food and some like dry food. They can't have the two on the plate.
Definitely.
Touching. It's just like criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm 100% behind that. I would have absolutely loved a segmented plate when I was younger.
Yeah.
Because that would have made sure that, the beans didn't touch the sausage, or the sausage didn't touch, even the two dry things, the sausage didn't touch the chips, so you kind of have those things.
Yeah.
And again, it's because a lot of times neurodivergent people prefer those kind of categories of eating those things. So that actually might be related to one of those other 5 senses of touch. So, thinking about texture in your mouth as well, so dry and wet. But touch also extends to, the things that we feel in our body. So like our clothes, our, hot and cold and all of those things, which again is another really interesting aspect of how we process our sensory world.
Yeah. And then I suppose you've got the extreme then, haven't you, with ARFID, which is, restricted food intake.
Yeah.
Which is just debilitating, isn't it? So I think guidelines on our ARFID is it has to be 11 foods and not outside of that, just 11 foods that person will eat. And that just must be hard.
Yeah. So if we think about conditions like ARFID and eating disorders, which we also know are very common in, autistic young females and just generally neurodivergent, more in the neurodivergent population.
Yeah.
So again, I think, because we're talking about senses today, I think those topics are so important, and I think we're going to talk about those in a whole episode.
We need a whole episode for that one,
to explore all of that in so much detail.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So hit me with the 3 big word ones.
The big word ones. Yeah. So if we start with proprioception. So proprioception, if I can, the best way I like to describe it is, so if I have my hand up here. Yeah. I know that my hand is up here, not because I can look it and I can see it, but actually if it's behind me, I know where it is because I can feel it in my body.
Oh, okay.
So my proprioceptive sense allows me to know where my body is in space and time. So it allows me to know how close I am to you, if I wanted to pick something up, how much I have to hold it. All of those different things. And a lot of time, neurodivergent people can really struggle with some of those things. So they might find actually, personal space, I need a lot more personal space. Or they might struggle with knowing what's appropriate. So actually being super close to you. They might struggle and appear to be a little bit clumsy because actually they go to pick something up and they kind of overshoot it, or they, don't quite grip it enough, or grip it too much and it breaks. So you can see how that kind of sense of your own body can be quite tricky for a neurodivergent person.
Yeah. So would that be a part of a dyspraxia?
Yeah,
kind of profile.
Definitely. It's definitely related to dyspraxia. So you can see how a person with dyspraxia would have those differences in their proprioceptive sense. So again, they might have things where they are, they struggle, and it might be undersensitive, or they might have things where they're oversensitive to it as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And then what was the other one?
So we've also got vestibular,
which is
that is our balance sense. So vestibular is kind of thinking about, how am I able to hold myself up on a chair without being propped up? How am I able to navigate walking in a small line? How am I able to ride a bike? All of those sorts of things. And whenever I think about bike riding and vestibular senses, I always kind of have a little chuckle to myself, and I always have to be really kind to myself because I was one of the only people I know that failed my cycling proficiency. And I now know, that actually that was down to my vestibular sense, because actually I've got quite rubbish balance. So I will really struggle with things that involve a certain type of balance. Bike riding is particularly one of them. But then there are other things which my balance is much better at. So it's kind of, there's certain things that I'll be better at because of how my vestibular kind of processes things and how other things don't.
So do you do, I'm sure, do you do skiing?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and how are you with that?
So skiing is actually, for me, it feels a very different kind of balance then. So for me, skiing is something that feels very positive.
Yeah.
So I can balance on a ski. I can probably ski one-legged. I used to, can't anymore, used to be able to ski backwards.
Oh, wow.
And my balance in that perspective is completely different.
Yeah.
Stick me on a bike. Oh, and I can't, where you see people who can do one-handed or two-handed and all of that.
Yeah.
No, I struggle with that a great deal.
Oh, see, I must have good balance because I was a no-handed biker when I was
There
a teenager.
you go.
Uphill, downhill. I used to steer like by leaning, and I go really fast around corners.
Amazing. So your vestibular sense in that respect was just, brilliant.
Off the chart.
Off the charts.
Yes,
vestibular
something I excel at.
skills. Wonderful. I
did break all my bones though, falling off bikes all the time, but never mind.
So that also may be related some of the impulsivity, kind of ADHD part of you as well, Dawn. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Yeah.
So then what's the last inner?
So the last one is interoception. So interoception is just what it sounds like, really, our internal senses. So for me, that is knowing if we're hungry, if we're thirsty, if we need the loo, if we're unwell, if we're hot, if we're cold, all of those things internally. But also another one is pain. And we know a lot of neurodivergent people have different reactions to pain, and that's like an internal sense. So I've worked with young people who have broken their arm and not realised because their interoceptive sense is so dimmed that they haven't felt that they've broken their arm, and they might have got a massive swelling, and everyone's going, "Are you sure you're all right?" Like, yeah, it's fine, and then they realise it's broken. And it also is the other way as well, where you have a young person who has got maybe a very small injury, but they're actually experiencing a humongous amount of pain for it, and it can look like they're being overly dramatic, but actually their sensory reaction to that is like really intense. And then the other thing that's also linked to interoception is our emotions. So you and I know neurodivergent people, we have big emotions. So that's also linked to our interoceptive sense as well. So again, how we process things internally. And we also know that a lot of neurodivergent people have what's called alexithymia. So alexithymia is that not being able to kind of label or understand your emotions. So just as you might not be able to recognize when you're hungry, you also might not be able to recognize when you're anxious. Just as you might not be able to recognize when you need a wee, you might not be able to recognize when you're starting to feel really low and feeling really sad. So it's all about those internal feelings, that interoception. And you can see how that can create, lots of difficulties for neurodivergent people in lots of different ways. And you can also see how they can link as well. So if I have got, let's say my interoception senses are dimmed, so I don't really know when I'm hungry. And then I'm also really fussy with what I'm eating, because actually my taste senses, so you can see how those can then create real difficulties with eating. Or, maybe if I don't recognize when I'm feeling sleepy, and I also don't recognize, or I don't really like bright lights, you can see how those two senses can play in part as well. So things like that.
Going back to the pain thing, what I found really interesting that you were saying is it's like you were describing my children then.
Yeah.
So I've got my eldest who doesn't really feel pain. Or I just always thought she hid it well, but she said it never really hurts that much. She broke her arm when she was 2. She fell down the stairs. She went to a party.
Yep.
And I kept thinking, no, something's not right. And we went to A&E, and they made her open a door handle. That's the test they do with little ones. She opened the door, and they were like, "That's not broken. She won't be able." But because she's 2, we'll X-ray her anyway.
Yeah.
And it was a clean break.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, I felt like the worst mother ever. And then on the flip side, I've got my youngest who went through a phase, by the way, for about 1.5 years of every time she even cut herself a little bit, she'd faint out cold because she couldn't cope with the pain.
Yeah, it's that overwhelm.
Oh, yeah. And her body, she used to faint and then do this weird thing with her eyes like this. And the paramedic said it's actually normal, it's fine. But it's from one extreme to the other.
Exactly.
And you've just described that perfectly.
And that's fascinating. But again, thinking about, if you think about your older daughter who can't feel pain, how dangerous that could be for her, not recognizing that, maybe picking a coffee muck up, that it's really, really hot. So you could burn without realizing. Although I think for me, things like interoceptive sense can be a real kind of worry, especially if you're not recognizing some of those internal triggers, which could be allowing you to, or alerting you to danger.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I've got loads of other different scenarios in my head. Like she had a tooth taken out without pain relief.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hanging out anyway, but she didn't. She was like, yeah, no, it's fine. And the dentist was like, oh, yeah,
Really
so
good.
interesting.
Really good examples, Dawn. Yeah.
Okay, so also I've noticed as well, when people are overwhelmed or overstimulated, senses can be a lot more heightened as well, can't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Like,
definitely.
is that a neurodiverse thing?
Yeah.
think?
Do you experience that, Dawn?
Yes, absolutely. It's sight with me that
Okay,
bothers
brilliant.
me the most.
Yeah.
So bright lights. I don't like bright lights. I don't like big light. You know, everyone's got a big light at home, haven't they?
Yeah.
I can't have big lights on.
Which is why we have our beautiful fairy lights.
Which is why we have fairy lights in a nice dark mill. My cottage is so dark, isn't it? And that's the way I like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, me and big lights.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly following my husband around the house, turning those big lights off because he doesn't see it. It doesn't bother him. And I really envy that sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I have, you know, if I go to like a hospital appointment, I have to go with my sunglasses on, and it's embarrassing because people look at me. And I'm doing it because otherwise sometimes I can't open my eyes. They actually go red and sore.
Yeah, definitely. So if you think about that, that is such a really good example of how your sensory experiences kind of impact you.
Yeah.
So you're able to create your perfect sensory environment at home, your dark cottage, your fairy lights, candles, all of those things which allow you to feel really safe and comfortable for your eyes, so your visual sense. But then when you go to other places, things like, you know, hospitals, they are, as you said, known for being bright, fluorescent lights. And I think as well, the other interesting thing for me is sometimes people always thought it was the artificial lighting that was problem. But actually a lot of autistic and neurodivergent people say, actually, it's also bright sunshine as well.
Yeah.
You know, bright sunshine really struggles, but, you know, on those sorts of days, I feel more tired because I've had to kind of been bombarded by, you know, either the sun coming through the window or being outside. So yeah, that's a really, really good one. And as you said, you know, maybe on days where you're kind of a little bit more chilled out, you've not had that too many pressures going on, some of those sensory things you might not notice as much. But actually on days when you feel a bit run ragged, you might not have slept well, there's loads more going on, maybe you're just more stressed or more anxious, sometimes those sensory experiences that you have, you will feel them much more intensely. So again, you might know, you might, on those days, the big light might be even more stressful for you than it would be on a day when you're kind of, just normal Dawn.
Yeah. So interesting. So some children as well, and adults actually, really struggle with certain clothing as well, don't they? Labels, textures. I actually see that a lot in my family and friendship group. And it's actually, it can be really life-changing, can't it, with certain things?
Definitely. Yeah. So if we think about the clothes that we're wearing, if you're struggling with what they feel like, that can really impact on how you're going to go. Just think about school uniform, for example. So if a school uniform has like a stiff collar,
a tie,
crispy shirts, all of those things, tight things around your wrists, not only are you then, you've got to be in school, processing, learning, socializing, all of that stuff, but you're kind of feeling like you're wearing something that's really, really uncomfortable. And it's not just uncomfortable, it's at a level that's impacting your kind of your ability to regulate yourself because it's so uncomfortable. And I think as well, it's really important to think about the breadth of different sort of things. So when we're thinking about touch, it could be, some people have to have really tight clothes. Everything has to be tight, so it's right close to their skin. Other people, that would be the exact opposite. They have to have really baggy clothes, so everything's got that kind of space to move in them. Again, you've talked about, labels, cutting labels out of things. All of those things that people might, would feel certain clothes before you have to buy them. And again, that can look like you're being maybe difficult or you're being fussy. But actually, if when you're wearing them and you're feeling so uncomfortable, then my goodness, that's going to have such an impact on your day, your mood, all aspects of your life.
You can't concentrate, can you?
No.
Do you know, I can't wear jeans. I mean, I can if it's a quick burst, a night out. If I was going to a restaurant, I couldn't wear jeans because I'm sitting down. Like, jeans for me are a big no. I've got 700 pairs, by the way, and I won't phone because you never know, just in case.
You never know.
And it's not even a size thing or a weight thing. Sometimes it can be that I just like jeans.
They're quite hard, aren't they, that material? So denim's quite a hard material. And lots of people that I know say, actually, I just can't tolerate jeans. Other things are seams as well. So seams on socks, seams on underwear. And there's some great shops now that you can find online that, sell seamless socks and things like that, which are going to be really helpful if you are struggling, with those sensory experiences. And one of the things that I really love that I've seen, I think it was Chris Packham on his BBC documentary.
I love that.
He kind of like said when he finds something that is comfortable, both kind of like physically and sensory for him, and he likes the look of it, he'll buy like 5 of them. Because then why would I then risk wearing something that's going to be so uncomfortable if I can then have it I can have this jumper in 7 different colours.
Yeah.
And again, there's lots of different things, which just make it easier.
That's what I do. And I didn't realise until I had my assessment for autism, I didn't realise that everybody didn't do that.
Yeah.
So I have 1 pair of knickers times 20. I have 20 of the same pair.
Yeah.
And I won't budge on that unless I find an even nicer, comfier pair. I don't care what it looks like. It's just, yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't see that he'd done that actually on that documentary. I love that documentary. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Are there any sensory things for you, Freya?
Oh, I've got to say, yeah. So I was definitely a fussy eater, as I mentioned when I was younger.
Yeah.
Definitely. And that I suppose I've overcome a lot of that now.
Yeah.
But there are still bits that I recognize in myself. I would say one of the things I don't like, so I'm a little bit opposite to you, so I don't like the dark. I very much like the light. So my sensory seeking behavior would be more like having brightness, having warmth. That definitely is something that I've noticed in myself. But in terms of touch, the other thing is I really notice in myself, I don't particularly like wearing jewelry. When I've tried to kind of wear jewelry or even makeup sometimes, it just feels really claustrophobic. So have kind of spent a long time kind of battling that, being like, I should be doing all these girly things, or I should be doing this, and kind of like getting to that point and recognizing, well, I can do it by choice sometimes, but actually I don't have to do it, and I'm not going to do it, and kind of moving away from that. And that's been quite an empowering thing as well to kind of go through.
Yeah. So when you were young, you said you were fussy with food. How did your parents navigate that?
So my mum and dad were actually, well, it was more my mum actually, but she was really good. So I think sometimes we can do that, like, oh, actually, if a child is just presented with something enough times, we can kind of that exposure therapy. If we just keep feeding them broccoli, eventually they were going to eat broccoli.
Yeah.
And actually, we know with a lot of neurodivergent people, that doesn't work at all. They just develop it almost like tolerance for the unpleasantness. They don't actually get to like the thing. But I think with my mum, what she would do is if she found something that I liked that was healthy, then she would give that me how I would eat it. So for example, I can really clearly remember I loved chicken, still do, and I didn't like cooked carrots, so she would give me carrot sticks, raw carrots. I still love raw carrots to this day. But even when I did start to eat cooked carrots, I only would eat cooked carrots that were cut in a round, and because they taste different than cut in other ways. So I think one of the things parents can do is actually be really engaging and collaborative with their young person. The more you force things on them, the more it's going to just actually be creating more stress. But work collaboratively. What do you like? What can we do? And actually eating raw carrots with a cooked meal, it might be weird for some people, but it's okay.
Yeah, who cares?
Exactly.
What is normal, Freya? There is no normal. Normal just means average.
It does.
We ain't average.
It does. And I love that quote. What could you imagine that there was the best thing that someone ever commented, the best compliment someone could give you? Wow, you're really average.
I know.
Yeah.
I love that. Nobody wants to be told that, let's face it.
Exactly. We all want to be special. We all want to be weird. We all want to be different. And I think that's hopefully what our podcast is going to be, allowing people to see and celebrate about themselves, as well as recognizing what sometimes can be tricky. Yeah.
So something that really interests me as well, Freya, to end on, synesthesia.
Synesthesia is fascinating, Dawn.
Isn't it?
Oh,
tell our listeners all about it.
So synesthesia is when you almost have like a misprocessing of a sensory experience. So for example, you might be hearing music, but as you're hearing music, you might have a taste. As you are seeing a colour, you might associate that with a certain smell. So it's almost like you have a sensory input, but you're experiencing it through a different body sensation. And we know that neurodivergent people are more likely to experience synesthesia than a neurotypical person would be. So do you have anything like that, Dawn, that could be an experience that you have?
Oh, I wonder. You know I do. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how, like, far this is, but sometimes I do see things and words and stuff in colours.
Yep.
They can be like individual letters or actual words, but then I don't know if that's a learnt thing that, do you know what I mean, that I've picked up, that I know the colour of a certain thing, or I don't know really. I just assumed that everybody did that.
Exactly. And that's the fascinating thing about senses, isn't it? Because we can only experience our own.
Yeah.
I have no idea what your sensory experience is, and you have no idea what my sensory experiences are. And we can only sort of try to navigate them by conversations like this. I think that's what's really fascinating. Allowing that experience. And it is likely that maybe when your brain processes certain numbers, certain words, you might have different colours, different feelings.
It's always colour. I like shapes are different colours, like a triangle's green.
Yeah.
Why is that? What is going on with that?
Yeah.
But again, so what's a triangle to you, Freya? Do you not see anything?
I probably wouldn't see a colour if I think about a triangle. Although now I'm seeing a green triangle.
Yeah, you will forever now see green triangles.
It will forever be a green triangle.
I don't even know if this is part of the senses or not, but I'm just going to go off topic. Some people don't have the ability to visualize either, do they? So I visualize in colors. You're saying now you're going to visualize it in green.
Yeah.
Some people can't, can they, visualize?
Yeah, and I think that's probably related a little bit to our sort of sensory experiences, but also our brain processing as well. So we know some people think in words, some people think in images, some people kind of think in different ways. And I think that again comes down to how we're able to explain ourselves, how we're able to understand the world around us, how we're able to process all of that information coming into us. But it's a fascinating. Our brains are the most fascinating thing about us.
They are amazing, aren't they?
They are indeed.
Thank you. This has been really, really interesting. I'm excited for our next one already.
Excited to see where we go on our Chaotic Clarity podcast as we're exploring all things neurodivergence.
Yeah, we'll be covering everything.
Everything.
Literally.
If you have any ideas of things that you would like us to cover, then please send us a message. And thank you, Dawn. Again, it's been wonderful exploring our sensory experiences together.
I know. Thank you, Freya. I always learn when I'm with you. I love it. And we have a giggle. And we're going to have a margarita.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Take care.